In the 1600s, Europe was in a trade domination race. Spain and Portugal controlled gold and silver from the Americas, and the Dutch East India Company controlled the spice trade in Southeast Asia. Britain had no colonies, no access to foreign markets, and no financial power. They were behind in global trade, and they needed to make money quickly. The monarchy was broke, and Queen Elizabeth couldn't afford any more state-funded trade expeditions. The wealthy aristocrats came up with an idea. Instead of using government money, private investors would fund the expeditions themselves. They pooled their money to create a private company. The Queen gave the East India Trading Company a royal charter. This allowed the corporation to act with military power and legal authority. Investors in the East India Trading Company were not just businessmen. This is England's ruling elite. There was Sir Thomas Smith, Sir John Watts, Sir William Garrard. This joint stock company model was a new financial tool that allowed these merchants to fund large-scale colonial expeditions without any royal control or oversight. It was very much a situation of Queen Elizabeth agreeing what she doesn't see, she doesn't know. Before this, only kings and queens could afford overseas expeditions. East India Trading Company was the birth of corporate imperialism. They were a private company acting with the power of a country. For the Crown, this was great. It meant no financial risk. The company took all the risks. The Crown only collected taxes. Unlimited power. The EIC could capture new colonies without Britain needing to declare war. And it was able to act in secrecy, conquering land, controlling trade, and waging wars on behalf of the Crown without officially being a government force. No other English merchants were allowed to trade without the approval of the East India Trading Company. And while the company made a few families filthy rich, the British public got higher taxes and wars in their name. They first arrived in India as traders, but soon took over with war, bribery, and economic control. They forced Indian farmers to grow opium and cotton instead of food. They taxed Indians so heavily that people had to sell their own children just to survive. Villages were burned and women and children were massacred. British soldiers even tied Indian rebels to cannons and blew them apart. Tens of thousands of people were hanged, shot, or tortured to death, while millions more died of famine. And the British refused to give any kind of food aid, saying that it would make the Indians lazy. East India Trading Company had an army of 260,000 soldiers. That's bigger than the British army was at the time. And they systematically invaded and destroyed local communities across India and Southeast Asia. They used scorched earth tactics, destroying food supplies, openly referred to Indians as dogs and savages, tortured, flogged, and publicly executed many people, looted palaces, stole from temples, and destroyed cultural artifacts. And a lot of this loot still sits in British museums today. These motherfuckers waged war for profit. The opium that they forced Indian farmers to grow was then smuggled into China. Fun fact, the British Empire were the largest drug cartel in history. The British wanted Chinese goods, tea, but the Chinese didn't want the British trash. All they offered them was wool. China said, we only accept silver. And the British wanted tea so much that they damaged their own economy, draining it of silver to buy tea. The solution was the Opium War. They smuggled all of these drugs into China to make Chinese people addicted. When Chinese officials cracked down on opium smuggling, Britain declared war on China. And in 1842, the Chinese were forced to give the British Hong Kong, open 5 ports to British trade, and pay reparations for the opium they destroyed. This wasn't enough for the British. They wanted more access to China. So they invaded Beijing, and they looted and burnt the Summer Palace. In 1860, China was forced to legalize the opium trade, allow Christian ministries in, and open even more ports for British trade exports. This caused the Century of Humiliation. Opium addiction devastated Chinese society. Their economy collapsed and they lost control of their own markets. Foreign powers carved it up, as usual, and in 1911 the Qing dynasty fell. These wars were funded by British taxpayers, despite being waged by a private company. And so at home, in Britain, ordinary workers are being forced to pay more taxes while the rich pay literally nothing. This meant that small British businesses couldn't compete with the EIC. Food prices at home rose, resources were redirected towards empire building, and British workers faced extreme poverty while the London elite built massive fortunes. Poor British men were forced into the Navy and the Army to fight these drug lords' wars. Many of them were shipped off to India, China, and Africa to die for corporate profits. They believed that they were fighting for their queen and their country, but actually they were fighting for the gold-lined pockets of murderous investors. $45 trillion was stolen from India. Millions were killed by famine as the British took food away. Millions of people in China became addicted to opium. And the EIC supplied Atlantic slave trade and enslaved labour for plantations. African gold, diamonds and land were seized to fund the British industry. The average British worker saw no benefits from any of this empire building. The British Empire was a pyramid scheme. Only the aristocracy got rich off it. Everyone else paid a price, huge price. These people didn't give a fuck about their nation or their queen. They cared only about themselves and their greedy wealth. There was never anything civilized or progressive. This was land theft, control, profit, and bloody warfare. Colonization was a game for bored London elites.